Hello everyone, and welcome to the Time Show, telling everything as it is in Nuance. So this will be one of my first of hopefully many episodes where I start talking about certain things that I get involved with, which will be mostly fighting games, but maybe I'll dabble into other medium. But let's go ahead and get this started. This will not be my introductory video, but that one I'm still working the script on, so eventually I'll do a proper introductory video for my channel. But now let's go ahead and get on to the topic of the matter. GranBlue versus Fantasy, or is actually GranBlue Fantasy Versus. So this game has came out and it's gotten a lot of attention for both the FGC and even the general consumer, since GranBlue is a very strong IP in the mobile game market and never really had any form of a consoleized games outside of its respective game. But we now have one on the console, which is a fighting game, which either is co-developed or actually fully developed by Arc System Works. That I am not sure on. But I personally wasn't really looking forward to this game, since I was generally not a fan of fighting game developers making fighting games for, I guess, quote unquote beginners or casual people. Not that I'm against games trying to court a new audience, but I'm usually not a fan of the idea that, oh, the reason why people don't play fighting games is because they're too hard or execution heavy. Which there are definitely games that rely on heavy execution, but there are other games that are more or less not execution heavy, but people still don't play them. AKA, that'd be things like the Blade Stranger, the Battle Arena games such as Saint Seiya, Soldier Souls, One Piece Burning Blood, JoJo All-Star Battle, and then we still have games like Fantasy Strike, Pocket Rumble, or even Dive Kit, where people just don't stick around with those games because normally fighting games are, in my personal opinion, a self-journey thing, where you figure out yourself and then you figure out how you want to apply yourself to that, say, game. But what is it about GranBlue Versus that has me wanting to talk about it? Well, I guess the first thing is, well, I was more or less left surprised by this game. I thought I wasn't going to like it because it was definitely following the tropes of, hey, let's make the game easy to control so people can play it. And I'm still not the biggest fan of how it controls, but it does enough good points that I still see it as a good and competent product. For starters, there's a lot of, well, I would say distraction modes for people who don't want to stick around the core gameplay, such as the fighting game aspect. It has this quote-unquote RPG mode, where it's really more just a beat-em-up mode, where people go through a wave of enemies of more or less NPCs or whatever, and wail on them, like a beat-em-up style of the game. There's nothing new that GranBlue Versus done. We've already had fighting games that took the beat 'em up style, such as Tekken with their Tekken Force. We have Guilty Gear Asuka that has something in that vein, both in the Asuka arcade game as well as the Judgment PSP game. And then there's game even back near in the early 90s like Tobal that had its own little dungeon mode aspect. And I think I can even say even Street Fighter ES even tried to apply something like that as well. Regardless, GranBlue doing that is really nothing new. However, considering the current age of current gen console, which will include the PS5, the Xbox One X, and the Switch, there are more or less very few games that even offer something like that to the equivalent, at least when it comes to the modern generation. The games that I mentioned earlier are actually past previous games from 2 or even 3 generations behind. So I will just give GranBlue Versus credit for doing that, and it does seem to be handled somewhat competently. I didn't stick around in the mode too much because that's not what I came for this game for. I came for the core gameplay, which I'm going to get into right now. So the game does want to operate on a traditional, technically it is a 6-button fighter, but you don't actually have to use the skill button. That's what they call the special button in this game, where how the characters do special attacks. The reason why I say you don't need to actually use this button is because the game still allows you to do commands in a traditional sense. They attempt to use the design where many other games in the past have tried, where you could do commands by just pressing a direction in the button. I guess the most popular example of this will be the Smash Bros. But you do have games such as, once again, Pocket Rumble, Fantasy Strike, Blade Stranger, which all had the same design of you could do commands with just a press of a button. But in GranBlue Fantasy Versus, you can also do the commands traditionally. By tradition, we mean a combination of directions with a button, such as if one character has a fireball technique, just press forward and the special button and that will come out. But if you want to do it the traditional way, then you could do down, diagonal towards, and towards the person, or in the fighting game term, quarter circle forward and the tap button. The reason why the game chooses to do this is if you do use the skill button will put that current command on cooldown. Apparently this is something reminiscing to the mobile game, which I still have no experience on, so I can't quote unquote truly comment on that. But they do have a system where if you use the special button, then your command will go on cooldown, which will disable that command for a period of time until that cooldown has finished. While if you do the command, say the traditional manner, then the cooldown will be exceedingly fast, more or less even non-existent, if you will. And that does seem to be kind of the driving force of GranBlue Versus. They kind of want you to micromanage your commands, because not only do you have regular commands, you have EX commands. And EX commands, I believe you can only do with the traditional command. And once you do those commands go on cooldown regardless whether you had used the special or the traditional manner. So the game does want you to prioritize micromanaging, which is generally a core part of fighting games, since many fighting games beyond Street Fighter 2 have started adding resources to the game, where characters may have one or two resources to micromanage to keep up with the pace of the fight. And GranBlue Versus Fantasy is no exception in that regards. But for the other buttons, there is the light attack, which is generally your quickest attack. Normally they're safe, but you get minimal rewards off it. Then you have your medium attacks, which is roughly in the middle between being faster than being faster than light, but not being as fast as the next button, which would be hard attack. Not hard attack. Did I say fast? I did say that. Let's correct that. Your medium attack will be faster than your light. Sorry, will not be faster than your light, but will be faster than your hard attack. But it won't do as much damage as compared to your hard attack, which will be the next thing I'll talk about. Your hard attack. It is your slowest attack, but usually it compensates by having more range and higher damage output. And generally it is unsafe for that matter. Then there is the unique button, which is something that's probably exclusive to GranBlue Fantasy Versus, though it is pretty close to also BlazBlue's drive system, where basically it's a special button. It's a button that has a special feature for each character where they do different things. Some characters will have a parry, some characters will have a command movement, and some characters will have an additional attack from that button. And then finally there is the guard button, where as your name says, guard. It will allow you to guard attacks. However, in GranBlue Versus Fantasy, you also have the ability to just guard traditionally, such as holding the button away from your opponent. The reason why they seem to have done this is similar to how the special button has its own pros and cons, so does the guard button compared to the traditional guard. The guard will keep you guarding as long as you keep holding it. However, one of the cons of using that compared to traditional blocking is you will not be able to just guard. Just guard is a common mechanic in fighting games where when the defender needs to guard an oncoming attack in just the right time before it lands on them. It's something akin to Garo Mark of the Rules Just Defend or Guilty Gear's Instant Block, but the properties are not as But sorry, the properties are not as, what do I want to say, pronounced. When you do just guard, you just gain additional meter and negate chip, which is pretty good, but nothing spectacular compared to, let's say, guard rolls just defend, where if you just defend, normally you got recoverability life and you had the ability to guard cancel. And in Guilty Gear's case, when you did SM block, it reduces your guarding frames, your guard recovery. GranBlue, it just chooses to just reward you with additional meter as well as negate some of the chip damage you would take in from the special attack. Another con of the guard button, besides losing the ability to just guard, is also the fact that if an opponent attempts to, well, actually no, I am informed that you're not allowed to cross up when you're. I'm informed that when you attempt to guard a cross up, the guard button will not work. I have yet to actually verify this myself. Maybe I'll do so eventually, but so I'll put that in the to-do list. But another thing also with the guard button is, I believe if you are guarding while your opponent attempts to throw you, if you do successfully tech their throw, you will be at a negative compared to if you were just guarding traditionally. At least that's much I can remember from being told. The reason why I am bringing this up though is to go back to the fact of how I feel that GranBlue still doesn't do the best job of teaching people who are not familiar with fighting games to get comfortable. Because some of the nuance of GranBlue first events are kind of, well, that thing that is just only for GranBlue first events. GranBlue fantasy versus, pardon me, I apologize. Moving forward, yes, for starters, I feel it doesn't do the most organic job of implementing its controls and its system mechanics and rules. Since they do still allow you to do things traditional compared to the simple manner, more or less the accessible controls that they designed, by and large, put the player at a disadvantage in the long run compared to doing things the more traditional manner. And I feel that more or less brings up a false tactic in the grand scheme of things. People will be using the guard button and the special button thinking that this is the game wants you to use these because they're in the game. If something's in the game, you're usually expected to use certain things. It is similar to how when BlazBlue has their when BlazBlue or Guilty Gear have their stylish mode, or other games has easy mode. They change so much of how the game controls naturally that they're more of a hindrance. They would give players immediate results, allow them to start doing stuff immediately. However, because it is so much of a, as I say, because it takes so much control out of the player, which fighting games are really about you controlling what you can do, it more or less gives people the delusion that they're playing the game when they're really not playing the game. And I feel that really just hurt people in the long run, because eventually they'll be put in scenarios where they will continue to use the special button or the guard button, but be at a disadvantage because the game intentionally put those disadvantages for using those accessible controls compared to using the traditional controls. Pause. Might need to edit this. Alright, yes, so I do feel that this design philosophy is ultimately detrimental, because one of the things about fighting games, as I mentioned, is a self-journey discovery, and there's only so much you can you can only improve at certain things unless you know what is the problem. But if you're shown a scenario, so rather let's use a hypothetical example. You're trying to use the guard button to guard against your opponent who's crossing you up. Problem is, the guard button, you only know how to guard through the guard button, and you're gonna think, well, I'm trying to guard this attack, but I'm not guarding it. Why is that happening? Why is that happening? and unless the game actually informs you that you need to block regularly, which for all intents maybe it does, but then the player might be asked, well, if that's the case, why didn't I just been taught to guard regularly instead of using the guard button? Yes, you make things easier, but it's the same thing equivalent to having a person learn how to ride a bike through the training wheels. I'm not saying that technically there shouldn't be some accessibility to be had, but the training wheel is only supposed to just kind of get you comfortable with something, but then you eventually need to be able to get your own balance and not be codependent on the training wheels, if you will. Problem I feel with GranBlue First Fantasy is I don't think it really kind of leads player into that realm of, okay, well, use these accessible controls, but get used to doing things traditionally because this is where you need to go. GranBlue First Fantasy seems to kind of present itself in the fact that it wants you to use the accessible controls because it is a prominent feature of it, but then why are you actually putting in these disadvantages or handicaps for them for using it? Is what I want to ask. Well, it's not ask, but it's what I'm thinking personally. When I think of other games that do it, they either go full, well, we're going to change the game's rules from traditional fighters that we're just no longer going to be a fighter at this point, or we're going to be upfront that we're still playing traditional fighting game, but make sure the accessible controls are in line with our system. Case in point, Fantasy Strike. Fantasy Strike, for example, does not have crouching attacks. So all the players can do is move left or right. So you're going to just block going backwards. There is no overheads or low mix-ups to be worried about. But the game does make up for this by having its own other form of mix-up or opening up opponents. While a game like Blade Stranger, pretty much just, well, we made accessible controls, so we're gonna just go ahead, keep everything else traditional as fighting game, but make sure that the accessible controls is in line with make sure our accessible controls are in line with our fighting system, which I think they did do that well because, like, for example, command grab. There's only really two command grab characters, but their command grabs are not instantaneous because one of the things about command grabs design and fighting games, normally they're difficult motions, but you got high rewards for that. Blade Stranger chose to go with, okay, well, we have command grabs, but because we can't design them like traditional SPD, we're going to design them in a different way where it has increased startup but much higher rewards or other applications to compensate for that. They more or less found that middle ground, and right now I feel GranBlue First Fantasy doesn't do that good job of finding that middle ground. I mean, yes, technically it does have pros and cons with its accessible controls, but I feel that it really should just integrate its controls organically and not just go, hey, we have accessible controls, but people who do things traditionally, you got this, and you're at a better advantage for doing that. It's more or less just some problem that they were trying to fix, which was, how do we not have a gap between legacy players, or better yet, fighting game players who are used to fighting game, compared to the casual people who are not really in depth with fighting games. You more or less just created a further divide by having basically two different control layouts for players to micromanage. And one thing I'll say about fighting games are already such a nuance. Fighting games are already just complex as they are, and to even make it more blurry or difficult to navigate what is basically quote unquote the proper way to play a game and the just handicapped way of playing the game. So that's kind of my feeling. But with that aside, if I do disregard how GranBlue First Advances does handle its goal of bridging the gap of casual people and fighting game players, I do still think that the game is a competent made product due to the fact that, as I mentioned, it has a good couple of modes to let people just more or less enjoy, have fun with the game. The game has, without a doubt, stellar presentation, great music, and the cast, if anything, I'm very impressed with the cast of characters. They all play, if anything, distinctly different, and they all seem to play a role. If you want to be your neutral monster, you have the mid-screen characters who are good at poking and controlling the momentum of matches. You have your rushdown characters who are very aggressive, get in the opponent and stay in on them. And then you have the characters who just want to stay far away and just more or less keep that distance. And then you just have everything in between there. No character seems to be particularly weak so far, even though that's definitely a popular point for people. They like to find out who are the strong and weak characters. The game is barely a week old, but the system mechanics does seem to lend itself to allow the multiple different play styles, and that's definitely what I care about my fighting games, is how many different viable play styles are there. And I do feel the system kind of does allow all play styles to kind of allow different play styles to have a viable chance in the competitive atmosphere. Since one, damage output is generally high for the most part, there's a good set of system mechanics to handle both offensive and defensive options. Case in point, for offensive, everybody does at least have a universal overhead to work with to try to open up a crouching opponent, while also having a grab. And then defensively, everybody has a dodge, which gives them roughly frame 1 visibility, as well as a roll, which allows you to bypass certain attacks. So since it has all that going for it, which are definitely strong tools to have, I feel that most characters can definitely contend with most strategy and play styles if you take the time to learn that character's in and out, the matchup, as well as mastering the system mechanics. As far as for my own personal note into GranBlue First Fantasy, right now I've been leaning on the character Zeta. She's definitely kind of the character who fits my archetype of playstyle, sort of. She is a mid-screen, neutral, strong character where she does have a projectile, and she has a lot of she has a stance mode that gives her counter abilities. What do I want to say counter? Let me just say armor moves, and she's allowed to have different follow-ups from the armor move. So essentially, she has a lot of different ways to essentially steal a turn away from an opponent, which is what I'm generally about. I like to steal turns away, not let my opponent get to do what they think they can do to me. But not only that, she does also have some decent mobility in regards to having I won't say a command dash, but basically she does have a move that allows her to tackle people, and she can also change how she tackles individuals. So I definitely been enjoying her for the most part, but I'm also interested in trying Vasaraga. I like how he does have a command grab, he has very big normals, and he just has the ability to potentially disrespect opponent's options since he has the ability to armor through people. And the fact that he also just does damage helps me out a lot, because I'm not really a combo type of character, which is kind of ironic because Zeta definitely does require combo to kind of make up for the damage, since her damage output is technically on the lower end majority of the case. But I still like the fact that she can still steal turns away, which is why I kind of sort of stick with her. But if there is also another potential character that I'll be interested in, it may be Percival, since he's definitely a simple game plan. He still has command grabs. His mid-screen presence isn't too terrible, since he does, not terrible, it's not shabby, since he does have pretty big normals, and he does have the damage output, and he does have a dragon punch to more or less try to steal or turn away from an opponent. But since since his projectile is not as impressive as other characters, I kind of have him on the not really sure I want to use him. He's kind of maybe a backup in case I do stick around with Zeta and I wind up I'm not capable of using Vasaraga. So he's kind of the backup character. Though there is one more additional character I'm interested in, or actually maybe two more. It'll be the final boss, Chaos Bringer, who is not currently available. You're going to play him in the you're gonna fight against him in the arcade mode. I don't know exactly how he plays, but I do just like how he looks since, well, I've always been a big boss characters in fighting games. But not only that, it does, with some of the gameplay video I do see of him in his boss form, it does seem like he's probably going to be something of a zoner, which I do like. So I'm definitely going to pick that up. And in fact, speaking of zoner, I can't say that I also haven't looked at Meteora as well. Though I'm a little concerned with trying to do all her different setups. I mean, even though I used to play characters like Rachel and BlazBlue for that, I'm just generally don't like to try to micromanage stuff. I like to keep my game plan simple to some degree. But in fact, that's one of the things that I kind of like about GranBlue Fantasy Versus. While in most fighting games, I would generally kind of know who I want to play and stick with them. Due to how GranBlue designed its gameplay and its characters, I can even see myself playing someone like Lil Wayne, who's kind of a keep away type of character, or La Diva, who is the traditional grappler in this game. And I can even say a case for me even playing Gran, who's technically more aggressive, but he just does feel fun to play with. So yeah, that's going to be more or less my personal note for GranBlue Fantasy Versus. I will also say how I do feel I might also play Nomaru. I think that's how you pronounce her name. She looks like she's sort of a samurai girl, sort of. Or rather, she at least has a sword and she keeps it sheathed, like the EI style, which has always been a favorite fighting style of mine. So I'm also keeping a lookout for her. But with that said, I think I could go ahead and end this video. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you everybody next time. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope to see you everyone next time in the Time Show.